We're taking a look at a film that didn't just win an award. It really reshaped the whole landscape of 21st century animation.
Oh, completely. And not by playing by the rules.
No, not at all. It did
Yeah.
it by aggressively breaking them. We are talking about the 2001 phenomenon that is still echoing today, Shrek.
Absolutely. And it's so important to set the goal here.
Right. Our goal today isn't to walk you through the plot, the ogre's quest or donkey's journey.
That story is, it's basically ingrained in pop culture at this point.
Exactly. We're here to look at the machinery behind the film's success, the chaotic and disruptive production, the dramatic casting decisions.
Which were incredibly high stakes, and the technical wizardry that was required to even get this thing made.
And ultimately, how this one movie became this enduring kind of rebellious cultural force that is, still expanding its influence even now.
That's right. We are focused strictly on the structure, the history, and the impact. And when you look at the source material, the significance of Shrek becomes undeniable very, very quickly.
This wasn't just another successful animated movie.
No, not at all. It was an institutional classic almost from day one. Its very existence was a challenge to the established order of the animation world.
And you can see that in the official recognition it got, right?
You can.
Yeah.
Just to set the context, consider this timeline of achievements right out of the gate.
Okay.
Shrek was the first animated film of the entire 21st century to be selected for preservation in the National Film Registry.
Which it earned in 2020. That's a huge deal.
It's massive, and it was the first animated film ever to be listed in the American Film Institute's top 10 films of the year.
So it was competing against live-action dramas,
Yeah.
big blockbusters.
Exactly, and winning. And then, maybe most symbolically, it won the inaugural Academy Award for Best Animated Feature.
All of that tells you something.
It tells you that its quality, its cultural disruption, it was all recognized at the absolute highest levels from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's unpack where this all came from, the origins. Because the film's unique, irreverent DNA, it was there from the start.
It was baked in.
It was baked in, right from the source material. The 1990 children's book, Shrek, by William Steig. This was not a book designed for a smooth, traditional Disney-style adaptation.
Not in the slightest. And the journey to the screen is, well, it's long and it's complicated.
It starts in a very different place. Steven Spielberg actually acquired the rights way back in 1991.
Years before DreamWorks even existed.
Right. And his original vision was for a traditionally animated version, 2D animation, something that would have fit perfectly within the aesthetic of the time.
It's fascinating to think about that alternate universe.
It really is. Think about this. Shrek was originally going to be voiced by Bill Murray.
And Steve Martin as Donkey.
Can you imagine? That was the plan in the early 90s, before computer animation just completely took over.
A total historical divergence. But the project really gained its iconoclastic momentum when producer John H. Williams convinced Spielberg to bring it to the new studio.
To the newly founded DreamWorks Pictures in 1994.
Exactly. The company was looking for something to establish its own identity. And development began in 1995 under Jeffrey Katzenberg, Williams, and Aaron Warner.
And they were drawn to the source material for its tone, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. That initial enthusiasm says everything about the final film's tone. Williams said he was drawn to the book because it was, and I'm quoting here, irreverent, iconoclastic, gross, and just a lot of fun.
So that rebellious energy, that deliberate upending of fairy tale rules, that was the foundation from day one.
It was the entire foundation. They weren't just making a fairy tale, they were making a parody of the entire genre.
Okay, so this is where the story gets really dramatic. And it sets the stage for how the film ended up looking. We're talking about the technology challenge.
And the near total failure that forced this massive pivot.
Wiping out 18 months of work.
A year and a half of R&D, just gone.
So the initial plan was, well, it was incredibly ambitious, especially for the mid-90s.
It wasn't full CGI, not at all.
No. The plan was a live-action animation hybrid. They were going to build these incredibly detailed miniature sets for all the backgrounds.
And then use motion capture. Cutting edge at the time. Specifically, the Expert Vision Hire's Falcon 10 camera system.
Right, so they'd track the movements of live actors who are providing the physical performances and then composite the animated characters onto those real sets.
The goal was this kind of human-driven realism that hadn't really been seen before.
Yeah.
A whole crew was dedicated just to this R&D phase.
A year and a half of work. And then in May 1997, they screened a test reel for Katzenberg.
And the result was, in Katzenberg's own words, devastating. He said, "It looked terrible, it didn't work, it wasn't funny, and we didn't like it."
Wow, just a complete shutdown.
A complete shutdown. And that failure, that, wholesale abandonment of all that time and technological effort, it forced the pivot that gave us the film we know today.
They had to scrap the hybrid model.
Entirely. And shift to full computer animation. They immediately brought in Pacific Data Images, PDI, in 1998.
And PDI was already deep in production on ants at the time.
They were. So that urgency, the necessity of handing this troubled project to a team that was already defining their own CGI style, that fundamentally shaped Shrek's final visual identity in ways no one could have predicted.
It's incredible. The entire look of the film we know was basically born from a technological emergency.
It really was. And that context, that pressure, it also explains the creative tension happening behind the scenes about the film's tone.
About how edgy and adult it should be.
Exactly. There was a significant internal struggle over that. Co-director Andrew Adamson was reportedly pushing for a much higher degree of adult appeal.
Suggesting things like more explicit jokes.
Yes, and using hard rock music like Guns N' Roses on the soundtrack to really signal that rebellious tone.
But Katzenberg pulled back on that.
He did. He was aiming for a broader, family-friendly appeal that would hit both kids and adults at the same time. So he vetoed some of those more extreme ideas.
But the core philosophy from the writers, that was preserved.
That's the key. The writers, Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who worked on the script for 2 years, they grounded the characters not just in fairy tale tropes, but in, well, human psychology.
They made sure Shrek stayed a misanthropic anti-hero.
And they based the four main characters, Shrek, Donkey, Fiona, and Farquaad, on what they called maladaptive responses to self-esteem issues.
That sounds incredibly academic for a kid's movie. I mean, did that level of complexity risk going over the heads of a younger audience?
You'd think so, but that was precisely the genius of it.
How so?
By grounding the characters in these really genuine, relatable human vulnerabilities, Shrek's fear of being rejected, Fiona's anxiety about her appearance, Donkey's constant need for validation, the humor and the parody worked on a much deeper emotional level.
So it made it accessible to adults without losing the kids.
Exactly. The cynicism was always coupled with this genuine pathos. The script wasn't just a string of jokes. It was a character study about people or, ogres trying to overcome their own insecurities.
And that gave it the substance it needed to balance out the aggressive, irreverent style.
Precisely. It was the heart of the film.
So if the production history was chaotic, the casting story is, well, it's nothing short of tragic drama.
It really is. The original Shrek, Chris Farley, was so central to that early vision.
And his passing just irrevocably changed the core of the entire film.
It did. Farley was cast, and he'd completed nearly all of the character's voice work.
He reportedly only had about 5 days of recording left.
That's right. And after his untimely death in late 1997, his brother John was understandably asked if he would consider finishing the remaining lines.
But he refused the offer.
He did. And it's a very sobering reminder of the path the film didn't take. The existence of that lost version isn't just a theory.
No, a story reel with a sample of Farley's dialogue was leaked in 2015.
And you can hear it. Shrek sounds much more like Farley's high-energy comedic persona.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge the profound loss that occurred and the incredibly difficult situation that put the production team and the subsequent cast into.
Absolutely. So when Mike Myers was hired to step into that enormous void, he knew he couldn't just imitate what was done before.
He couldn't. He insisted on a complete script rewrite. And this wasn't out of disrespect.
No, it was a necessary creative decision.
Exactly. To ensure that his version of Shrek would have its own unique identity and to leave no traces of the voice and character that Chris Farley had already developed.
And Myers later said he took the role because he loved the core message.
He said it was a great story about accepting yourself for who you are and that he really wanted to work with Jeffrey Katzenberg.
But the drama didn't end there. After Myers replaced Farley, the film still went through another monumental, very high-stakes change.
The creation of Shrek's iconic voice.
Myers recorded the entire character's voice once in 1999, but then he saw a rough cut in February of 2000.
And he made this pivotal and very expensive request.
He asked to re-record all of his lines using the now famous Scottish accent.
This wasn't just a sudden whim, though.
No. The DVD commentary explains that he had actually tried several accents during the first recordings. He tried his natural Canadian accent.
And even an intentionally absurd Lothar of the Hill People accent.
Right, before settling on the Scottish one. He said he based it on the voice his own mother used when she read him bedtime stories as a child.
And the studio agreed to this massive undertaking, which led to that famous story about the cost.
A $4 million story.
Yes. Katzenberg publicly stated that they took out $4 million worth of animation out and did it again, essentially ripping up a huge portion of the visual work they'd already completed.
That number has become legendary in animation.
It has, though Myers later stepped forward to clarify the specific cost structure a bit.
What did he say?
He said that while the money may have been spent, it didn't necessarily mean they threw away $4 million of finished animation. He explained it more like, instead of me going in for 10 sessions, I went in for 20 sessions. I got paid the same.
So more about the labor and re-rendering time than trashing completed scenes.
Possibly. But regardless of the exact cost, the creative validation was crystal clear. Steven Spielberg personally wrote Myers a letter thanking him.
He said the new accent had fundamentally improved the movie.
He did, and that confirms just how high the creative stakes were. The producers understood that the voice was absolutely critical to unlocking the character's appeal.
And the recasting domino effect kept going. Jeanine Garofalo was originally set to voice Princess Fiona alongside Farley.
Which would have been a pair of really edgy, recognizable comedic voices for the time.
But she was ultimately fired from the project for unexplained reasons. She later said publicly that she was never even told why.
It just adds another layer of turbulence to the whole production. Which brings us to the astonishing performance of Eddie Murphy as Donkey.
He became the comedic anchor for the entire film.
He absolutely did. He allowed all the other disparate elements to finally coalesce. Critics universally hailed his work.
Roger Ebert gave the film 4 stars. Susan Wojcicki from USA Today called it the comic performance of his career.
And Richard Schickel of Time magazine remarked that no one has ever made a funnier jackass of himself than Murphy.
That level of acclaim is just. It's almost unheard of for voice acting, which film critics often dismiss.
It is, but the recognition reached historical heights at the BAFTA Awards.
Which really speaks volumes about the impact his performance had.
It does. Eddie Murphy received a BAFTA nomination for Best Actor in a supporting role for Donkey.
He became the first, and he's still the only actor to ever get a BAFTA nomination for a voiceover performance.
Think about that. It wasn't just an award for the film. It was a huge step toward recognizing voice acting as a performance art, on par with live-action acting.
And before we move on, I want to touch on a really wonderful detail from the sources about Donkey's inspiration.
The real-life model.
The real-life model. The sources confirmed the character was modeled after a real miniature donkey named Pericles, or Perry, who lived in Barron Park, California.
It's a great piece of trivia.
But it's also a little poignant. The real donkey, Perry, the muse for this massive global character. He just passed away recently.
In January of 2025, at the age of 30.
It gives this strange, almost surreal connection to the digital character, realizing he had a real-world, long-lived muse right up until now.
It really does. It grounds the fantastical character in reality and reminds you that behind all the sophisticated technology, there are these human, and in this case, animal inspirations.
It speaks to the effort they put in to make these characters feel real, even when they were completely absurd.
Absolutely.
Now let's pivot to the technical side of things. Because beyond the voice casting, Shrek was a visual and auditory departure for mainstream animation.
It really forced PDI, Pacific Data Images, to solve problems that even Pixar hadn't really attempted yet.
The production notes highlight just how expansive this world was. DreamWorks claimed the film included 36 separate, distinct in-film locations,
which they noted was more than any previous computer-animated feature had tried to do.
And the art directors drew inspiration from all over. They traveled to places like Hearst Castle, Stratford-upon-Avon,
the Dordogne region in France for that European feel, and even a magnolia plantation in Charleston, South Carolina for the look of Shrek's swamp.
So to manage all of that, the PDI team had to use their own proprietary software.
They did, alongside industry standards like Maya, especially for the really complex stuff like cloth and hair animation. The shift from their previous film, Ants, was critical here.
How so?
Well, Ants had very stylized, almost geometric characters and environments. Shrek required a level of naturalism in movement and texture that earlier CGI films had kind of skirted around.
And there were 2 elements that demanded brand new solutions.
Groundbreaking solutions, really. First, Donkey's fur. This was a major, major challenge for the surfacing and visual effects animators.
They had to make sure thousands of strands of fur flowed realistically and reacted to light and movement.
And crucially, as they put it, they had to ensure the fur did not look like that of a chia pet.
The Chia Pet problem. That's such a great, accessible way to describe a really complex technical issue. If the hair on a character looks stiff, the audience just disconnects. How'd they solve that?
They use something called flow controls inside a very complex shader system.
Okay, break that down for us. A shader system is like the digital paint that tells the computer how light should bounce off a surface.
That's a great way to put it. And flow controls allowed the animators to essentially comb the fur digitally. They could give it attributes that allowed it to change direction, lie flat, or swirl realistically in the wind.
So once they mastered that for Donkey,
He could apply it to everything: the grass, the moss in the swamp, Shrek's beard, his eyebrows, even the threads on his tunic. It gave the entire film a new level of visual richness that just wasn't there before.
that is extraordinary detail.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and the second big challenge was Shrek himself.
Yes. Specifically, applying PDI's sophisticated muscle and fat system to Shrek's whole body.
Now, they had used a facial system on ants for the character Z to get realistic facial expressions.
Right, but for Shrek, they applied that muscle and fat simulation to his entire expansive body.
And why was that so critical for Shrek's body compared to, say, a skinnier character like Z?
Because Shrek's physicality is just integral to his character, his bulk, his grimace, his vulnerability. It all needed to feel tangible.
They needed hyper-realistic body dynamics.
Exactly. For instance, if you watch closely when Shrek talks, you can actually see him form a double chin when he opens his jaw.
Because the system included the physics of the fat and muscle layers under the skin.
Precisely. And this was crucial for landing the sophisticated adult humor and the emotional sincerity of the script. The characters couldn't look like rigid dolls. They had to carry weight and express emotion through these micro movements, which took the team a very long time to perfect.
Now moving to the auditory side, Shrek was just as revolutionary with its sound. It broke decisively with the Disney tradition of using original Broadway-style scores.
It did. It successfully integrated well-known pop music and oldies directly into the narrative flow.
And that fundamentally changed how animated films sounded from then on.
It did. Instead of every big plot point getting a new original ballad, Shrek used covers of classic songs like On the Road Again and Try a Little Tenderness as part of the score.
Which drove the tone forward and created this immediate nostalgic connection for adult audiences.
But of course, the real signature moments involve Smash Mouth.
The use of All-Star in the opening credits is now legendary. It immediately tells you this is not your typical fairy tale.
But the insight from the sources is that All-Star was originally just a placeholder.
Right. It was supposed to be replaced by an original song called Stay Home by Matt Mahaffey's band Self, which was written to mimic the feel of All-Star.
But Jeffrey Katzenberg intervened. He insisted they keep All-Star. His influence on the music was huge.
And it was Katzenberg who requested the big finale be redone.
It was. The ending was originally simpler, but he wanted it to go out with a big laugh, which resulted in that now iconic ending with Smash Mouth's cover of I'm a Believer and all the fairy tale creatures dancing.
And that became the template for animated movie endings for the next 10 years.
It really did. And we have to note the subtle but very interesting licensing issue with Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah.
Right. The version you hear in the film is not the version on the soundtrack album.
Exactly. The version used during that emotional montage in the movie is sung by John Cale. But the version on the official soundtrack is by Rufus Wainwright.
So why the switch?
The filmmakers preferred Cale's darker, more atmospheric version for the film itself, but commercially, they ran into licensing problems.
Wainwright was a DreamWorks artist, and Cale was not.
Precisely. So to simplify the commercial release and promote their own artist, the studio just substituted Wainwright's version on the album that you would go out and buy.
It's a fascinating look at how creative decisions can get overridden by corporate synergy and licensing convenience.
It happens all the time in the music industry.
Okay, so let's talk about how Shrek established itself not just with tech, but with deliberate, irreverent parody. This movie spent a lot of its energy targeting the animation establishment.
Primarily Disney.
Yes, the specific style and ethos of Disney films. It's layered with these parodies that really reward you if you're an adult viewer paying attention.
Absolutely. When Donkey flies, it's a direct visual nod to Dumbo.
Tinkerbell falls on Donkey, that's Peter Pan.
And Fiona's operatic singing that causes the bluebird to explode, that's a direct shot at the sanitized nature scenes in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah, and the final transformation scene, where Fiona assumes her true love's form, is a clear inversion of the ending of Beauty and the Beast.
But the mockery was also institutional. Lord Farquaad's kingdom, Duloc. It's designed to mimic the clean, manufactured, almost sterile cheeriness of Disneyland.
Including that scene that directly parodies the It's a Small World ride.
With the singing puppets, yes. The clear implication is that the manufactured perfection of the Disney corporate aesthetic, the very thing Shrek was rebelling against, is the real villain of the story.
Which brings us to the famous corporate backstory. The widely cited suggestion that Lord Farquaad himself is an unflattering caricature of the then CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner.
This wasn't just industry gossip. The sources really suggest this was a targeted corporate jab.
Jeffrey Katzenberg, a former chairman at Disney before he co-founded DreamWorks, had a famously bitter falling out with Eisner.
A very deep and public animosity after Katzenberg was passed over for the top job.
So framing the villain, this vertically challenged, controlling, power-obsessed lord, as a stand-in for his corporate rival was DreamWorks planting a flag directly in Disney's face.
Whether Katzenberg directly ordered the physical resemblance is, debated. But the thematic connection of Farquaad representing the controlling corporate side of fairy tales is undeniable. It gave the parody a very specific, aggressive edge.
And on top of the Disney rivalry, the film wove in all these other clever pop culture nods aimed squarely at adults.
The dialogue is full of them. When Shrek is on the bridge, he says, "That'll do, donkey, that'll do."
Which is a direct quote from the movie, Babe.
And maybe the most unexpected one is Fiona's fight scene with the Merry Men. It uses wirework and slow motion effects.
It's a huge visual reference to the combat in The Matrix, which had only come out 2 years earlier.
And then you have the smaller, more literary references. The Magic Mirror segment parodies the TV show The Dating Game with Cinderella and Snow White.
Taking these sacred Disney figures and putting them in a tacky modern game show.
And the Gingerbread Man, with his one leg, quoting Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol, saying, "God bless us, everyone." This blend of humor was critical to its success.
And that success was immediate, and it was profound, especially for a film with a $60 million budget.
It opened on over 3,500 screens, which at the time was the second highest number of opening locations in history.
It earned over $42 million on its opening weekend and eventually grossed almost $500 million worldwide. It was the fourth highest grossing film of 2001.
But the real disruption, the real act of corporate aggression, came with the home media release.
This was highly strategic.
Oh, it was an act of war, really. Shrek was released on DVD and VHS on November 2nd, 2001.
And that date was not a coincidence.
Not at all. It was the exact same day that Pixar's highly anticipated Monsters, Inc. hit theaters.
Disney executives reportedly saw this as a deliberate attempt by DreamWorks to siphon off some of their film's steam.
And it was. It was DreamWorks using their new market muscle to actively undermine their chief competitor, and the strategy worked spectacularly.
The video release generated over $100 million that weekend alone.
It broke the record held by The Phantom Menace to become the fastest-selling DVD of all time, selling 2.5 million copies in just 3 days.
It solidified DreamWorks as a major, aggressive, competitive player in the animation space.
No question.
So we've tracked the chaotic genesis, the casting drama, and the corporate battles. Now let's talk about how this hit transitioned into an institutional, enduring classic.
The accolades really confirm its standing. As we noted, it won the very first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature,
beating out Pixar's Monsters, Inc. in the process.
A huge victory. It also got a BAFTA for Best Adapted Screenplay, a major honor for an animated film, and was named the AFI Movie of the Year.
And the AFI also ranked it number 8 on their top 10 list for animated films.
And importantly, it was the only film on that list that didn't come from Disney or Pixar. It was a standard bearer for a different style of animation.
And that significance was formally recognized by the Library of Congress in 2020.
But the film's most profound long-term influence, what some critics call the Shrekening, is how it fundamentally changed what people expected from mainstream animation.
It wasn't just about DreamWorks becoming a competitor to Pixar.
No, it was about shifting the entire animated landscape away from that earnest musical format toward irreverence and pop culture saturation.
That is the absolute core of its legacy. It popularized using contemporary pop culture references, and crucially, that end-of-film musical number.
The big dance party ending.
That became almost mandatory for many studios right after Shrek. But let's be critical for a moment. Doesn't that formula, the pop culture jokes, the dance number, doesn't that get old fast?
That's a very astute observation, and the answer is yes, absolutely.
It led to a decade of maybe lazier animated films trying to copy the cynical tone without the heart.
It did. The success of Shrek created a mandate for a kind of meta-humor that often lacked the thematic substance that the original script had. You can see that influence in films like Chicken Little or Robots.
But it also inspired a whole slate of fairy tale spoofs.
It did. Films like Happily and Ever After, Hoodwinked, and even Disney's later attempt at self-parody, Enchanted. The market saw that Shrek had created a new, commercially viable formula.
And the franchise itself has had a monumental life. 3 direct sequels.
Though the sources note that only Shrek 2 really received that same level of critical acclaim.
And 2 very successful Puss in Boots spin-offs, with the second one getting an Oscar nomination decades later.
And beyond the screen, it was adapted into Shrek the Musical, which ran successfully on Broadway and won a Tony Award for costume design.
And the fan connection has stayed incredibly strong, evolving in new ways, like the shot-for-shot fan remake, Shrek Retold.
A massive community effort from 200 filmmakers, blending all these different art forms. It just shows the deep devotion of its fan base.
And the legacy isn't over, which is remarkable for a film that's over 2 decades old.
The sources confirm active development on Shrek 5, scheduled for 2027.
And a Donkey spin-off movie is also in the works. Eddie Murphy confirmed in June 2024 that he'd already started recording for Shrek 5 and would move right on to the Donkey film.
It is clearly not a relic of 2001. It's an active, powerful cultural touchstone that studios believe still has massive commercial value.
So what we've seen is a story of a project that went through a failed tech experiment, a tragic recasting, a dramatic accent change, and a corporate rivalry. Shrek proved that animated films didn't have to be sweet and conventional.
They could embrace the ugly, the flawed characters, the irreverent humor, and still be emotionally genuine and critically recognized.
You detailed just how much trouble the animation style caused, the abandoned motion capture, the complex effort for something as simple as donkey's fur.
The full-body muscle system for Shrek. This production history suggests a chaotic, high-stakes process driven by constant reaction.
So as a final thought to consider,
Does the very fact that Shrek succeeded despite all of these technical and casting hurdles, rather than because of some smooth, planned process, does that explain why the final film felt so exceptionally fresh and unpredictable?
a success born of necessity.
Exactly. It forced the creators to abandon conventional smoothness and prioritize wit, character depth, and emotional honesty. And the result was a film that felt immediately more authentic than its overly polished predecessors.
It's a marvelous thing to consider that chaos created perfection. Thanks for listening.